That's what I was saying. I mean, bro, do not sneak up on me like that, man. You scare me. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But like I said, you can't sneak up on me like that, man. I'm scary, you know? I was trying to have a conversation right here. Anyways, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. As you guys do know, the Olympiad is through. But I went ahead and shot back and grabbed the first round game between Wesley and Sergio Miguel. And so, you know, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. All my people that are coming from the Philippines, I would say mabuhay, kumusta aking makaibigan, masaya ko makita kang muli, magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang araw, magandang gabi. Whenever you watch this, I appreciate it very much. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. Anybody who is coming from Angola, I would say bom dia, boa tarde, como vocês estão, meus amigos, obrigada. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. I speak a little Portuguese to you. But if you guys are ready to go, man, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got the move d4, knight to f6. We got c4, e6, knight to c3. And then the move that no one ever guessed, bishop to b4. We have the Nimzo Indian. Yeah, nah. None of you guys guessed that move. You guys didn't know the Nimzo Indian was coming. It's not a possibility. Only I knew. Anyways, we got the move e3. We see castles by black. We got bishop to d3. And then we have the move d5. Just such a mysterious game we're playing. And yes, nobody knew that move either. So don't act like you knew that d5 or c5 could have been coming. Anyways, you know, as you guys always know, you have to go d5 or c5 in one of these positions because white is just establishing, if we back up, white is just establishing too great of a pawn center, man. So you can't let that fly. If you do, white is literally just going to wipe you off the board and take all your pieces and make you cry, and then you're never going to want to play chess again. So we got, like I said, d5. Pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5. It's the most logical thing because you do not want to allow this capture here because then it just kind of messes up your bishop, bro. So we got the move a3, not worrying about bishop takes c3, which we see in the game. Pawn takes c3, but I will say that we do have a slight weakness here on c3, and it's a little bit hard to push this pawn. And I will show you exactly what Miguel does to try to prevent Wesley from pushing this pawn, and he does actually a really good job of that. We see the move b6 first. Like I always mention, you have bishop to a6 possibilities and stuff like that. So we do see knight coming to e2, bishop coming to a6, and of course, as you guys can see, you cannot push c4 now because you're just going to be giving the pawn away for free. And I mean, that's not how we play chess. We don't just give pawns away for free, because then you lose. So we do see the castles going on. We see bishop taking d3, queen taking d3. And even though it might look like a strange move, we have queen to c8. And queen to c8 is doing literally the same exact thing as that bishop was doing. You know, we see the move f3, which is a really good move in this position because we are restricting this knight's movement. And right now, that is black's best piece. But if we just kind of go back one move, you know, if you said, hey, man, I want to get rid of my weakness now, let me go c4, you will be looking at queen to a6. And I mean, this is a little bit uncomfortable because your queen is undefended on the d3 square. So that can become a problem. And this is just giving black, you know, just a little bit too much. So like I said, we did see f3, which was the best move. Now we see queen to a6. Like I said, the whole entire time, you know, black is recognizing that this is a problem piece. This is a weakness. So black is trying to keep that weakness alive. So we got queen taking a6, knight taking a6. And then we have reached the point in the game where I have the novelty, as well as I would like for you to try to guess and see what move Wesley played in this position. Go ahead and do so. Okay, I think you guys thought enough. Okay, so I think Wesley was like, bro, this game is just too boring. It needs to be crazy. So he plays the move g4. So he literally says, I don't care that pawn is in front of my king. You don't have any firepower going on over here, so my king is good. So he just pushes g4. And he's just saying, man, you know what? I'm about to just do something crazy. Let's go g4, man. Why not, right? So we see the move c5. And you guys knew it was coming. Like I mentioned before, you know, white, even though they do kind of have this slight weakness on c3, I mean, they got a nice pawn center going. I mean, they got this kamikaze pawn over here saying that it wants to, like, literally kill this knight for all time. And you do have some possibilities here. I mean, if you can get e4 in, you know, exchanging here, you do have a nice little pawn situation. So black is saying, bro, I'm trying to, like, combat that a little bit. So c5 comes, and it is the perfect time for that to come. We see the move a4. An a4, it doesn't seem super logical at the moment, but you will see in a little while that that is a really, really good move to play. We see rook f to e8, and we're basically telling white, you're not developing this bishop over here because this pawn is by itself, and it's scared, and you need to defend it, bro. So the rook comes over to d1. We see pawn taking d4 and pawn taking d4. And backing up in this position, instead of the move a rook over to d1, it was absolutely possible. This is actually the best move in the position, just to go king to f2. It might seem a little bit strange, but like I said, if you recognize in your position that this is a problem pawn and you do want to free up your bishop a little bit, the king to f2 will make a lot of sense. And then also something you have to think about too is that because this f file is not open, the king is really not in danger being on that square. Of course, if this pawn wasn't here like this and the rook was moved over and, you know, then you would have some knight takes g4 issues, but you do not. In this position, and that is not the move I was trying to play. But like I said, the rook is over, and so you don't have any problems on the f file. So king to f2 definitely was a nice move. Plus, you're more into an in game in this situation. So I mean, getting the king rolling towards the center is something that you want to do anyways. So we do see rook over to d1, pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. We see knight down to b4, and I mean, you know, it looks like black is trying to do a little bit of trickery, right? They're thinking, okay, you know what? If I could place this knight on c2, I'm going to be double attacking this pawn. And also, with the position of this rook, I'm going to be attacking here. But, I mean, even though this isn't the best possible move for white, you know, you definitely have some good ways to defend. So let's say you're just like, hey, man, I don't care about what you're talking about, bro. I'm calculating far enough into the future. And say you push a5, right? The knight comes down to c2 thinking it's doing something like, hey, bro, I'm hitting your knight. You can't come up here and defend laterally. I'm just going to grab this pawn, right? Well, I mean, black wouldn't be doing as good as they think they're doing. Rook would be coming up to a2. Knight would be taking e3. Bishop takes e3. Rook takes e3. And then the pawn takes on b6. And if you did a little bit of calculation, you would be in a very, very nice position at this point in time. Now, of course, this wasn't the best possible variation to go into. After we see knight to b4, the absolute best move that you could play in this position is what we see Wesley So play, and that is rook over to b1. Just not worrying about this knight coming down. I mean, if the knight does come down to c2, the king is going to be coming up to f2, that magical square that I told you about already. But a very interesting move that Miguel does make in this exact position, and I will be mentioning it a little bit later, is the move a5. And it's just thinking like, you know what, I'm just going to, like, you know, just ensconce my knight right there on b4. You're not going to touch it because you don't want to trade rook for knight, right? Well, like I said, later on, I will be mentioning this exact situation where you play a5. So we do see bishop to d2. We got rook a coming over to c8, just trying to take over this file. And since this rook is on that pawn, like I said earlier, you do not have really any bishop takes, pawn takes, and rook takes because you're going to be giving up this pawn. You know, so it's pretty much going to be an even trade. And then you're going to have this knight kind of hanging on e2. So, you know, it's going to be pretty even. So we do see rook d to c1. You know, Wesley So just making an attempt to just take over that file too. Rook takes c1 with check, rook takes c1, and then we do have the move h6. You know, we always want to try to create luft for our king. As you can see, you know, white has a legitimate luft created for their king already, so they don't have any problems, back rank. And then we see the move h4. And Wesley So is basically saying, screw my own king. Look at this. The king is like literally doesn't have like a whole lot of like friends in front of it. The pawns are just literally saying, hey, man, we don't care about you. We're going to leave you alone. You're going to be lonely down here, right? It's funny. So we do see the move g6. We got rook over to b1 because we are preparing to move king to f2 at some point and just give our pawn some support. And then we're going to try to snap this knight off the board. So the knight says, I'm avoiding all that. Let me go knight to c2. And then now we see king to f2. And everything is defended. I mean, this bishop is defending. So we don't have any captures here. We're good to go. So the rook does come down to e6. And this was the point in the game that I was saying I was going to mention in a few moves. Now, if you guys have seen my videos before, then this position should kind of stick out to you a little bit. You guys hear me talk all the time about, you know, when one pawn freezes two pawns in an endgame. Well, basically, what Miguel did is he kind of did it to himself. You know, he was trying to hold his knight here, so he moved a5. But the thing about it, the endgame implications is now, I mean, it is kind of freezing these two pawns with that movement. So you have to be really careful about doing it to yourself. Because then you're kind of helping your opponent freeze your own pawns. You don't really want that. So, as you guys can see, it's going to be actually pretty hard to push this pawn. We do see the knight coming up to f4, just tickling that knight. You know, this knight is here because it's trying to defend this backward pawn. And so it doesn't really have a whole lot of places it can go. You know, it basically just has these two squares. And that's not really what you want from a rook, just basically being restricted to two squares on the board when it can move everywhere. So we do see the rook coming over to c1. We see knight over to a3. We see rook to c8 with check. The king comes down to g7. We see bishop down to c1. And as you guys can see, I mean, this knight is, you know, it's not feeling the most comfortable ever. We see the knight coming down to b1. The king comes over to e2. And as you guys can see, even though moving knight down to b1 was the best possibility, I mean, this knight doesn't really have a lot of, literally has no places to go. So this is a very sad knight. The knight is on the rim, so it makes it grim. And I mean, this is literally not where you want this knight to be at all. We got the move g5. Pawn takes g5, pawn takes g5, and then the knight comes down to d3. And I mean, at some point, this knight is really eyeballing this e5 square because this is like the most perfect square to go to ever. So we see the move b5. And I mentioned before, it's going to be really kind of hard to push b5 because it literally seems like it just gives away a pawn, which it does. But there really wasn't much better to play. Like I said, the knight is pretty much stuck down on b1. And I mean, what else do? You don't really have a whole lot that you can really do in this position. This pawn is actually very sad, and you will see what I mean in a little while. But we do see the move b5. Pawn takes b5, a rook goes over to b6. So you seem like, you know, hey, I'm getting a little counterattack, but you do see the move knight to e5. After the rook takes on b5, you do see the rook coming down to c7. And this pawn is going to die. Like, it's not going to be living. Like, you're going to be digging a grave for it and burying it down here, and you're going to have a service, and it's going to be sad. So we do see the knight coming back to e8, but, I mean, this is just dream chess. I mean, we're hoping that the rook just stays there and forgets that it's attacked and that it doesn't like itself and just ties. But we see rook taking f7 with check. The king comes back to g8, and then we do see the rook to a7. You do have a passed pawn going on, so you do kind of want to make sure that this pawn does not go any further than it already is. The knight comes down to d6. We see king down to d1. The knight comes down to c4. And I mean, trading for black isn't really what you want to do, but like I said before, you don't really have a whole lot extra that you can be doing. The knight takes on c4. Pawn takes on c4. We see king up to c2. And I mean, this knight is, like I said before, really stuck. And so this rook now is tied down to protecting this knight because, as you can see, this knight does not have anywhere to go. So, you know, it pretty much just, like, you know, kind of got into a really depressing situation about 7 or 8 moves ago. We do see the move c3. And then we have a really kind of cute move because, like I just mentioned a second ago, this rook is tied down to the protection of this knight. So you can do this. You can hit the move d5 up because, as you guys know, you cannot take here because you're going to be looking at taking here. And I mean, that knight is going to be even sadder. So you got to try to do something about this knight. So we see knight to d2. And I mean, you also have the possibility of going e4 and just winning at life. Because, I mean, there's not a lot you can do about these pawns just kind of just, you know, taking their time to get to the promised land. But like I said, we do see d5, knight comes to d2. We see the move d6, rook comes over to d5, and then we do see the move d7. And it is in this position that Miguel does resign the game. And I realized that I messed that up. Sergio Miguel is a FIDE master, so the thumbnail will be correct. But in the presentation of this, let me fix that. He is a FIDE master. So, and you know what? I think I actually did it correctly on the thumbnail. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did it correctly on the thumbnail already. But yes, he is an FM. So for those of you that were wondering through the broadcast of this, I did incorrectly put him as a GM. Anyways, like I said, we get into this position here where we see that Miguel does resign the game. And I mean, there really isn't anything you can do in this situation. You absolutely cannot move this king anywhere, especially down here, because you're just going to be discovering a check, and then you got a free queen, and then the queen is going to be taking the rook, and you're just good to go. So if you guys do want an illustration as to why you can't, you know, that you can't do anything in this position as black, I will show you one possible variation. Let's say the king says, you know, they're like, hey, man, you know what? I want to try to step closer to the pawn so I can, like, maybe lend some help, right? Well, the problem is after you move king to f8, you know, this bishop does have the ability to move. So you're literally just going to be checking the king on a3, and it's just going to be forced back to pretty much the same square that it just came off of. Of course, if you go to f7, like I said, you're going to be pushing the pawn and promoting, and you're also going to be checking the king laterally. So, I mean, you would see rook to a8 with check. The king would go down to f7, and you'd see the queening of the pawn, and then you absolutely have to capture the queen with the rook. And so you're just not doing very well. That is just a possible variation, but there are probably at least 5 or 6. Get back down there. It's probably like at least 5 or 6 different variations that you can go into if you wanted to as white. And they are all completely winning. You have so many moves. So that was that first round game between Wesley and Sergio Miguel. So like I say, as always, to my people coming from the Philippines, I would say maraming salamat, aking magkaibigan, and obrigada for anybody coming from Angola. And I will see you guys next time.